The cake was on the table, a modest affair from the local bakery. 20 candles, a little nod to the big six. So Clara, bless her heart, had insisted on a party, even though I'd rather have just had a quiet evening with a good book. Willow Creek isn't exactly a hotbed of excitement, and that suited me just fine. I'd spent my life surrounded by books at the library, a life I thought I knew inside and out. Then the mail came. Tucked between the usual bills and flyers was a thick envelope, cream-colored, with a fancy embossed return address. Thorne and Associates. Never heard of them. My hands, usually steady from years of shelving, felt a little shaky as I opened it. Inside, a letter, formal and to the point. It spoke of a benefactor, an inheritance, and a legal matter requiring my immediate attention. Benefactor. Inheritance. It sounded like something out of a novel, not My Quiet Life in Ohio. I read it again, my brow furrowed. The words swam a little. We represent the estate of a client who has made provisions for you. Client? Who would leave me anything? My mind raced through the few people I knew, but none of them had the kind of money that would warrant a fancy law firm sending a letter like this. Felt like a wrong turn on a familiar road. The kind of thing that makes you stop and wonder if you're dreaming. Clara was humming in the kitchen, probably frosting more cupcakes. I folded the letter, tucking it back into its envelope. This wasn't the kind of birthday surprise I'd ever imagined. It was a knot in my stomach, a whisper of something unknown. A feeling that the comfortable, predictable world I'd built was about to get a whole lot more complicated. The cake sat there, 20 candles glowing, but all I could think about was that letter and the mystery it held. The letter sat on my kitchen counter, a stark white rectangle against the worn formica. Clara had already cleared away the birthday cake remnants, her usual cheerful humming replaced by a quiet concern. She'd seen the envelope, of course. Nothing gets past Clara. But I'd waved it away, mumbling something about junk mail. Junk mail from a law firm with an embossed return address. Didn't add up. That little knot of unease from last night had tightened, twisting into a genuine need to know. My quiet life in Willow Creek, the predictable rhythm of the library, the comfortable familiarity of my little house. It all felt like a stage set that could crumble at any moment. I needed to see this Thorne and Associates for myself. Quick search online and I found their address. Manhattan. Course. Where else would fancy lawyers with fancy stationery hang their hats? Train ticket was easy enough to get. I told Clara I was going to visit that antique shop in the city I'd been meaning to check out. She gave me that knowing look, the one that says, "I know you're up to something, but I'll let you have your secrets for now." Bless her heart. The train ride was a blur. The familiar green fields of Ohio gave way to the bustling, concrete jungle of New York. Thorne and Associates was in a gleaming skyscraper, all glass and steel, looking like it belonged in a movie. The lobby was hushed, filled with the scent of expensive polish and quiet power. I felt utterly out of place in my sensible slacks and cardigan. A woman with hair pulled back so tight it looked painful directed me to the correct floor. The elevator ride was silent, the numbers climbing higher and higher. My stomach did a little flip-flop. What was I even doing here? This was crazy. This was the kind of thing that happened to other people in books, not Eleanor Vance, retired librarian from Willow Creek. The office was just as sleek and intimidating as the lobby. A receptionist, impeccably dressed, looked up as I approached. "May I help you?" she asked, her voice smooth as silk. I received a letter. I stammered, fumbling in my purse for the envelope. "From Mr. Thorne." She took it, her perfectly manicured fingers barely brushing mine. She scanned the address, then spoke into a small phone on her desk. "Miss Vance is here for her appointment." A pause. "Yes, she has the letter." Another pause, then, "Understood." She hung up. "Please have a seat. Mr. Thorne will be with you shortly." I sank into a plush leather chair, feeling smaller than ever. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. I fiddled with the strap of my purse, my gaze darting around the room. Everything was understated, expensive. This was a world away from the worn shelves of the Willow Creek Public Library. Then a door opened and a man walked out. He was tall, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to see right through me. He wore a dark suit that fit him like a glove. He wasn't old, maybe early 40s, but he carried himself with an air of authority that made him seem much older. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "Marcus Thorne." He offered a hand. His grip was firm, cool. "Hello," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. He gestured towards a door. "Shall we?" We walked into his office. It was large, with a panoramic view of the city skyline. More glass, more polished wood. He sat behind a massive desk, motioning for me to take a seat in front of it. "Thank you for coming, Eleanor," he said, using my first name. It felt strangely intimate, considering we'd never met. "I understand you have some questions about the letter." I nodded, pushing the envelope across the desk. I don't understand. Benefactor. Inheritance. I don't know anyone who." Marcus Thorne leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "The letter is quite straightforward, Eleanor. You are the beneficiary of a trust established by your birth parents." My breath hitched. Birth parents. The words felt foreign, alien. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yes, your biological parents. They are, or rather were, Sterling and Vivian Blackwood." The name meant nothing to me. Blackwood. It sounded important. Wealthy. I don't know them. "That is understandable," Thorne said, his tone measured. "You were adopted shortly after your birth. Your adoptive parents, Beatrice and your late father, raised you. They were informed of your biological family's wishes, but they chose a life of privacy for you, away from all of this." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the office, the city, the implied wealth. "The Blackwoods are a prominent family. Very prominent. And very private. Sterling Blackwood is a man of considerable influence and means." My head was spinning. Adoption. Birth parents. Blackwood. It was too much, too fast. The quiet life I'd known, the life I'd cherished, was suddenly a carefully constructed facade. "Why now?" I finally asked, my voice trembling. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Circumstances have changed," Thorne said cryptically. "And Mr. Blackwood wishes to make amends. He believes it is time for you to know the truth about your heritage." Heritage. It was a word I associated with dusty history books. Not my own life. My life had been simple, honest. This felt like a betrayal of everything I'd ever known. The visceral drama he spoke of in hushed tones was unfolding right here, right now, in this sterile, powerful office. It was a cold, hard truth, delivered with the practiced detachment of a lawyer. And it was only the beginning. Marcus Thorne drove me. The drive from Manhattan to Greenwich felt like a journey into another dimension. The sleek city buildings melted away, replaced by manicured lawns and imposing stone houses that whispered of old money. Blackwood Manor wasn't just a house. It was a statement. A sprawling mansion that looked like it belonged on a postcard. All ivy-covered stone and perfectly placed windows. It was intimidating, to say the least. The kind of place where you'd expect to see Jeeves polishing a silver teapot. Not me, Eleanor Vance, retired librarian from Willow Creek. Thorne parked the car, and for a second I just stared. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. "He's waiting for you," Thorne said, his voice low, as if not to disturb the quiet grandeur of the place. He didn't offer to walk me to the door, just gave a slight nod. It was clear he'd done his part. The rest was up to me. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out. The air felt different here, cleaner but also heavier, charged with something I couldn't quite name. The massive oak front door creaked open before I even reached it, as if the house itself was expecting me. A butler, tall and severe, stood in the entryway. He didn't smile. Mr. Blackwood is in the library." The library, course, felt cliché but also fitting. The room was vast, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that probably held more history than the entire Willow Creek Public Library. The scent of old paper and polished wood hung heavy in the air. And there, standing by a massive fireplace, was Sterling Blackwood. He was older than Thorne, maybe in his mid-60s, with silver hair that was neatly combed back. He had the same sharp features Thorne possessed, but his eyes were different. They held a weariness, a deep sadness that seemed to have settled in his bones. He wasn't as imposing as I'd expected, but there was an undeniable aura of power about him. He turned as I entered, his gaze locking onto mine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the wind to push you over. I felt a strange mix of anger and a bizarre sense of recognition, as if a part of me had always known this man, even though I'd never seen him before in my life. "Eleanor," he finally said, his voice rough like stones tumbling. It wasn't a question, more of a statement, an acknowledgement. He didn't offer his hand. He didn't need to. The distance between us was filled with unspoken history, with decades of silence. "Mr. Blackwood," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. I clutched my purse tighter, my knuckles white. "Mr. Thorne told me about my parents." He nodded, his gaze never leaving mine. "Yes, he would have. He's very thorough." He gestured vaguely towards a plush armchair. "Please, sit down." I sat, feeling like an intruder in my own story. He remained standing, a statue carved from regret. "I'm Sterling Blackwood," he repeated, as if the name itself held some magic, some explanation. "Your birth father." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Birth father. It was still so surreal. "I know," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Had to. If I let any emotion show, I was afraid I'd shatter." "He told me you and Vivian are my parents." Sterling finally moved, walking over to a small table where a decanter and glasses sat. He poured himself a drink, his hand steady. "Vivian," he murmured, the name a sigh. "She'll want to meet you, of course." "In time." "In time," I echoed, a spark of my old librarian's assertiveness flaring up. "I'm here now, Mr. Blackwood. I've just found out I have a whole family I never knew existed. I don't think I have time to spare." He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes fixed on the amber liquid. "Vivian is protective of her own way of doing things. And of Julian." Julian. That was the son Thorne had mentioned, the one who saw me as a threat. "So what? I'm supposed to wait until your wife decides I'm worthy of her attention." The anger was bubbling up now, hot and unwelcome. Sterling finally looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something genuine in his eyes. Not just sadness but a deep, gnawing pain. "Eleanor, this is difficult. For all of us. For you most of all. I made choices. Choices that have consequences. And now, those consequences have found their way back to us." He paused, his gaze drifting towards the large window overlooking the sprawling estate. "You have every right to be angry, to demand answers. But I need you to understand. Things are not as simple as they seem." He wasn't offering comfort, just a warning. A hint that the truth, like everything else in this opulent house, was complicated and probably painful. And I had a feeling he was just scratching the surface. The visceral drama Thorne had hinted at was unfolding, and I was right in the middle of it. I'd been sitting in that library, Sterling's words hanging heavy in the air, when the door opened again. It wasn't the severe butler this time. It was a woman, gliding in like she owned the place. Which I guess she did. Vivian. Sterling had mentioned her. She was dressed to the nines, a sharp suit that probably cost more than my entire house, and her hair was pulled back so tight it looked like it was painted on. She had Sterling's sharp features, but her eyes were different, colder, like chips of ice. She stopped a few feet away from me, her gaze sweeping over me like I was something she'd found stuck to the bottom of her expensive shoe. No smile. No greeting. Assessment. Made my skin crawl. I'd been trying to process Sterling's confession, the shock of it all, but her presence was like a jolt of cold water. "Eleanor," she said, her voice smooth, too smooth. Like polished marble. It didn't sound like a question. It sounded like she was stating a fact, one she wasn't particularly happy about. "Sterling has been talking." I just stared at her. What was I supposed to say? "Oh, hi Mom, nice to finally meet you after 60 years. My mind was still reeling from Sterling's admission, the weight of his regret. Now this woman who looked like she was carved from granite. "He told me," I managed, my voice a little shaky. I tightened my grip on my purse, feeling like I needed something solid to hold on to. Vivian took a step closer, her eyes narrowing slightly. "He tends to be overly sentimental, especially when it comes to the past. It's a weakness." She glanced at Sterling, who had retreated to the fireplace, looking like he wished he could disappear into the flames. "We made a decision, Eleanor. A necessary one. For everyone involved." "A decision?" I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "You mean giving me away?" A flicker of something, annoyance, crossed her face. "It was an adoption, Eleanor. A very carefully arranged one. Your father and I, we had our hands full. Julian was young and the family business, the legacy. It required our full attention. You understand, of course." Understand. My head was spinning. This wasn't a business deal. This was my life. My entire life, apparently, had been a calculated decision made by these two strangers. "No, I don't understand," I said, my voice gaining a little more strength. The librarian in me was starting to surface, the one who didn't back down from a difficult patron. "I don't understand why I'm here now, after 60 years. Why now?" Vivian gave a small, dismissive wave of her hand. "Circumstances change. And Sterling feels a certain obligation. But this is not about rekindling a childhood. You have your life, we have ours. We simply wanted to ensure you were provided for. Marcus Thorne handles all of that. He's very efficient." She paused, her gaze fixed on me, assessing. "You've been living a quiet life, I gather. In Ohio." It felt like she was interrogating me, not having a family reunion. "Yes," I said, my voice tight. "I was a librarian." "A librarian," she repeated, as if the word itself was exotic and slightly distasteful. "Well, quaint. Look, Eleanor, I don't want any disruption. Julian is sensitive. He's the heir. This family has a certain image to maintain. We just need you to be discreet. Accept what's offered and go back to your quiet life. No fuss." Her words were a slap in the face. Discreet. Go back. She wanted to tuck me away like an inconvenient secret. The anger, which I'd been trying to keep a lid on, started to boil. This wasn't about providing for me. This was about control. Control. "You think you can just decide what happens to me?" I asked, standing up. My legs felt a little wobbly, but I stood my ground. "You think you can just make a phone call and make this all go away?" Vivian's eyes hardened. "I'm not making anything go away, Eleanor. I'm trying to manage a situation. A situation I've now become a part of. Don't be foolish. You have no idea what you're dealing with." She pulled a small, elegant card from her purse. It was heavy, embossed with gold lettering. "This is Marcus Thorne's direct number. He will handle the financial arrangements. Sterling will inform you of the details. Be sensible. For everyone's sake." She placed the card on a nearby table, a final, calculated move. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding, the weight of her words pressing down on me. The visceral drama Sterling had warned me about was just getting started, and Vivian was clearly directing the play. After Vivian stormed out, leaving that slick card on the table like a final insult, I felt like I'd been through a ringer. Sterling just stood there, a statue of regret by the fireplace, not saying a word. The air in the library, which had smelled of old books and secrets, now felt thick with unspoken accusations. I needed to get out of there, away from the icy glares and the suffocating opulence. I mumbled some excuse about needing fresh air and practically fled Blackwood Manor. Back in the car with Thorne, the silence was different this time. Not just awkward but heavy with everything that had just happened. Vivian's words echoed in my head. Discreet, manage a situation. Go back to your quiet life. It was like she was trying to shove me back into a box I'd never known existed. Thorne drove with his usual calm, his eyes on the road, but I could feel him watching me in the rearview mirror. He knew. He knew everything that went on behind those manicured hedges. Are you all right, Eleanor? He finally asked, his voice even. I just shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. All right. I was anything but all right. My whole life, the one I'd built brick by careful brick in Willow Creek, felt like it was crumbling. He pulled up to a quiet inn not far from the estate, a place that felt a million miles away from Blackwood Manor. I've booked you a room here for the night, he said. You'll want some time to process all of this. Perhaps to look through some things. Look through some things. What things? I'd come to Connecticut with nothing but the clothes on my back and a heart full of questions. He waited until I was inside the room, a simple, clean space with a view of trees, before he spoke again. When Sterling and Vivian decided to place you for adoption, they kept some of your belongings. Things they couldn't bear to part with, I suppose. They've been stored. Thought, perhaps now would be the time. He handed me a small, worn, leather-bound journal. It looked like something I might have owned as a child. It's yours, Eleanor. From your early years. My hands trembled as I took it. A journal. My journal. I'd completely forgotten about it. My mind, after 60 years, was a blank slate when it came to those first few years. I opened it, the pages brittle and yellowed. There were crayon drawings, childish scribbles, the beginnings of words I barely recognized as my own. It was like looking at a ghost of myself. I sat on the edge of the bed, flipping through the pages, a strange mix of sadness and curiosity washing over me. There were entries about Beatrice, my mom, her kindness, the little garden she tended. Nothing about Sterling or Vivian. It was all Willow Creek, all my life as Eleanor Vance. Then, near the back, I noticed something odd. One page felt thicker than the others. I ran my fingers over it, and my heart gave a little jump. There was a faint outline, almost invisible. A hidden compartment. Carefully, I worked my fingernail into the seam. The page creaked, then gave way, revealing a small, tucked-away space. Inside, folded neatly, was a piece of parchment. It wasn't a letter, not in the traditional sense. It was covered in symbols, strange little marks and numbers like a secret code. It looked like a coded message. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a childhood keepsake. It felt important, like a breadcrumb left by someone who knew I'd eventually find it. Who would leave a coded message in a child's journal? And why? The questions just kept piling up, each one heavier than the last. The worn journal felt heavy in my hands. The coded message a tiny, folded secret tucked away. I knew I couldn't tackle this alone. My first thought was Clara. She'd been my rock for years, the one person in Willow Creek who knew all my quirks and didn't judge. She had a knack for puzzles, too, always finishing crosswords before me and figuring out those tricky logic problems. I called her from the inn, my voice still a little shaky. Clara, hey. It's Eleanor. Hey. I need your help. Something weird has come up. Clara, bless her heart, didn't waste any time. She drove over to the inn, her sensible sedan pulling up like a beacon of normalcy. Seeing her familiar face, her kind eyes crinkling with concern, was like a breath of fresh air after the suffocating opulence of Blackwood Manor. I explained everything, the adoption, Sterling, Vivian, the whole unbelievable mess. Then, I showed her the journal and the parchment with its strange symbols. Whoa, Ellie, she breathed, her eyes wide as she examined the coded message. This looks like something out of a spy movie. What do you think it means? I don't know, I admitted, my stomach twisting. But it was hidden in my baby journal. Has to mean something. Something important. We spread the parchment out on the small table in my room. The symbols were tiny, precise, a mix of numbers and what looked like stylized letters. Clara, ever the pragmatist, pulled out a notepad and pen. Okay, let's break this down. What do we know about codes? Usually there's a key or a pattern. What was the first thing Sterling or Vivian said that might be a clue? We talked for hours, retracing every word, every interaction. Sterling's regret, Vivian's cold pronouncements. It felt like trying to piece together a shattered mirror. Clara started jotting down frequencies, common letter pairings, trying to find any kind of anchor. This little squiggle here, she pointed. It looks like a capital A if you squint. And this number pops up a lot. As the afternoon wore on, a pattern began to emerge. It wasn't a simple substitution cipher. It was more complex, layered. Clara's sharp mind, combined with my memory of the Blackwood's chillingly detached words, started to unlock pieces. We worked through the symbols, cross-referencing, guessing, discarding. The late afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting long shadows across the room. Then it hit us. A specific sequence of numbers, repeated several times, corresponded to a date. Not just any date, but a date from my early childhood. And the symbols surrounding it. They weren't just random marks. They were names. Names I didn't recognize at first, but then a chill went down my spine. One of them was Beatrice, my adoptive mother. Another was a name I'd never heard before, but it was linked to a location, a place far from Willow Creek. The message wasn't just about my adoption. It spoke of a desperate act, a hurried decision, a fear that went beyond mere inconvenience. The words, once deciphered, were stark and brutal. It wasn't just about Sterling and Vivian wanting a clean slate. It was about something they were running from, something they believed I was a liability for. They hadn't just given me away. They'd hidden me. And this message, tucked away in my own childhood journal, felt like a desperate cry from the past, a truth they'd tried to bury forever. The weight of it settled in my chest, heavy and suffocating. This was no accident. This was deliberate. The decoded message sat between us on the worn table at the inn, a chilling testament to a past I never knew. Clara's brow was furrowed, her lips pressed into a thin line as she stared at the parchment. The weight of it all, the betrayal, the calculated abandonment, was a physical ache in my chest. I'd thought that was the worst of it, the gut punch of knowing my entire life had been built on a lie. But Blackwood Manor, it seemed, always had another layer of poison to offer. Just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and orange, there was a knock on my door. Clara looked up, a flicker of unease in her eyes. I'd asked her to stay, and her presence was a comfort, but we were still in unfamiliar territory, surrounded by the echoes of the Blackwood's influence. I opened the door to find Julian Blackwood standing there, a slick, confident smile plastered on his face. He looked like he'd stepped right out of a magazine, all sharp angles and expensive tailoring. He held a slim briefcase in one hand. His eyes, a cold, assessing blue, swept over me and then Clara. "Eleanor," he said, his voice smooth as silk, but with an edge that made my teeth ache. "And Clara, is it? I'm Julian, Sterling's son." He didn't offer a handshake, just a slight nod. "I heard you've been doing some digging, finding things you weren't meant to find." My stomach tightened. He knew. Course he knew. The Blackwoods were a tightly knit operation, and secrets, especially ones that threatened their gilded cage, didn't stay buried for long. "What do you want, Julian?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. He stepped inside, uninvited, and closed the door behind him, effectively trapping us in the small room. The air suddenly felt thick, charged with his predatory energy. He looked at the parchment spread on the table, a hint of disdain in his expression. "That little puzzle," he said, gesturing with his chin. "Sentimental nonsense. Your birth parents were complicated, but they did leave you something. Something that could make all of this go away. He set the briefcase down on the bed and clicked it open. Inside, neatly stacked, were bundles of cash. A lot of cash. My breath caught. This was it. The manipulation. The attempt to buy my silence. "This is for you, Eleanor," Julian continued, his voice dropping to a more intimate, almost conspiratorial tone. "A substantial sum. Enough to ensure you have a very comfortable life, far away from here. All you have to do is forget about this little discovery. Put the journal back, forget the coded message, and go back to your quiet life. Consider it severance pay for your brief, unexpected connection to the family." He picked up one of the stacks of bills, letting them riffle through his fingers. "Think about it. What can that piece of paper give you? Uncertainty. More questions. This," he tapped the money, "is concrete. It's freedom. It's security. It's the end of all this unpleasantness." Clara, bless her, stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "You think you can just buy people off, Julian? You think Eleanor is some kind of commodity to be traded?" Julian merely smiled, a shark's grin. "Clara dear, everyone has a price. And Eleanor, with all due respect, has lived a life where a few $1,000s would make a world of difference. This is a generous offer. A way to smooth things over, to prevent a lot of messy complications for everyone involved." He looked directly at me, his blue eyes hard. "So, Eleanor, what's it going to be? Your quiet life, or a whole lot of trouble you're not equipped to handle?" The money sat there, a stark, tangible temptation, a stark contrast to the abstract, devastating truth I held in my hands. Julian's offer hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The stacks of cash on the bed seemed to pulse, a grotesque temptation against the stark reality of the decoded message. Clara stood beside me, a silent, steady force, her presence a shield against the slick manipulation Julian was throwing at us. I looked at the money, then at Julian's smug face, and a cold fury, deeper than anything I'd felt before, settled in my gut. This wasn't about money. Never was. "You think this is about money?" I finally said, my voice low and steady. "You think I've gone through all this, unearthed this betrayal, just to sell it off for a quick buck?" I gestured to the parchment on the table. "This isn't just a puzzle, Julian. It's proof. Proof that you and your family didn't just give me away. You hid me. You buried me." Julian's smile faltered, just for a second. He recovered quickly, though. "Eleanor, darling, you're being overly dramatic. Your birth parents made a difficult choice. A choice that benefited everyone, including you, in the long run. This," he tapped the briefcase, "is simply a way to make that choice permanent. To ensure you don't stir up trouble that could hurt everyone." "Hurt everyone?" Clara scoffed, stepping closer to me. "You mean hurt your precious reputation? Hurt your inheritance?" Julian's eyes narrowed, flicking to Clara with open disdain. "Clara, please. This is between Eleanor and her family. You're a friend, but you're an outsider. You can't possibly understand the complexities of our world." "I understand a scam when I see one," Clara retorted, her voice sharp. I held up a hand to Clara, then turned back to Julian, my gaze locked on his. "The message talks about Beatrice, my adoptive mother, and a place you don't want me to go. Why? What are you so afraid of, Julian?" He took a step back, his composure cracking just a little. "Beatrice was a necessary part of the arrangement. And that place is irrelevant, a forgotten piece of history. What matters now is the future. Your future. A comfortable, quiet future, away from all this mess." He tried to regain his smooth tone, but there was a desperation in his eyes now. "Think about it, Eleanor. You've lived a good, simple life. Why complicate it now? This is a chance to walk away with dignity, and a considerable amount of financial security." I shook my head, a slow, deliberate movement. "Dignity? You want to talk about dignity? You're standing here, offering me hush money, while my own birth parents orchestrated my disappearance. That's not dignity, Julian. That's cowardice. And I'm not walking away. I'm walking the truth. I picked up the parchment, holding it like a shield. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about what happened to me. And I intend to find out everything. So, why don't you take your briefcase full of dirty money and get out of my room? Julian stared at me, his face a mask of cold fury. He knew he'd lost this round. He closed the briefcase with a sharp click, the sound echoing in the small space. You're making a mistake, Eleanor. Big one. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. He turned and walked out, leaving behind the lingering scent of expensive cologne and a chilling sense of dread. Clara let out a shaky breath. Well, that was something. Yeah, I agreed, my voice raspy. But he's right. I don't have any idea what I'm getting into. But I'm not running from it anymore. I looked at the decoded message again, the names and the place now clear in my mind. Beatrice. And that unknown location. It was time to find out why they'd tried so hard to keep me from it. It was time to go to Sterling and Vivian. It was time for answers. The room in the inn, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Julian's words, the offer of money, the veiled threats, they still hung in the air, thick and cloying. Clara's steady presence beside me was a comfort, a solid anchor in the swirling chaos. But as I looked at the parchment, at the decoded message that had shattered my quiet life, a different kind of clarity began to dawn. It wasn't just about the betrayal, the abandonment. It was about the— Julian had called it a difficult choice, a necessary arrangement. But what kind of choice forces parents to hide their child away, to erase her from their lives? Suddenly the world around me blurred. The worn table, the flickering candlelight, Clara's concerned gaze. It all faded. I was no longer in that small inn room. I was somewhere else, somewhere that felt both familiar and utterly alien. It was a different time, a different me. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming lilacs. I was standing on the manicured lawn of Blackwood Manor, the grand estate that now felt like a gilded prison. It was a warm spring day, the kind that usually filled me with a quiet joy. But that day, a heavy dread settled in my stomach. I was younger then, maybe in my late 20s, still figuring out who I was supposed to be. Sterling stood beside me, his face etched with a weariness that went beyond his years. Vivian was there too, her usual poise a little frayed, her eyes darting nervously between Sterling and me. Eleanor, Sterling began, his voice rough, we need to talk. About your future. My future. I'd always imagined it stretching out simply, filled with books and quiet evenings. I hadn't known then that my future was already decided, a carefully constructed path laid out by people I'd never met. There are complications, Vivian said, her voice tight. She clutched an antique silver locket, her knuckles white. Things you don't understand. I remember the confusion, the gnawing sense of unease. They were my birth parents, the ones who had given me up. And they were telling me I couldn't have a future with them, not really. Not in the way I might have dreamed. Your father's position, Sterling explained, gesturing vaguely towards the imposing manor. It demands discretion. Certain things cannot be revealed. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Vivian nodded, tears welling in her eyes. It's for your own good, Eleanor. Keep you safe. To protect the family. Safe. Protect the family. It sounded like excuses, like hollow words designed to mask a deeper, colder truth. I felt a pang of something akin to pity for them, for the burden they carried. But it was quickly overshadowed by a rising tide of anger. They had made their choice. They had given me away. And now they were trying to explain it, to justify it, as if I were a child who needed to be appeased. But, Beatrice, I stammered, thinking of the kind woman who had raised me, who had loved me unconditionally. She's always been my mother. Beatrice is a good woman, Sterling conceded, his gaze distant. She gave you a good home. Stable life. That was the best we could do. The best they could do. The words echoed in the vastness of the manor grounds, a stark reminder of my place, or rather my lack of one. I saw then, with a clarity that chilled me to the bone, the gilded cage they lived in. It wasn't just a house. It was a trap. And they had trapped me before I even knew I was meant to be free. The lilacs suddenly seemed suffocating, their sweet perfume masking the rot beneath. I turned away from them, the weight of their decision pressing down on me, a burden I would carry for years to come, a burden that was only now, decades later, beginning to unravel. The flashback dissolved, leaving me back in the inn, the decoded message a stark reality on the table. Their difficult choice was my lifelong sentence. The memory of that spring day at Blackwood Manor still felt raw, like a fresh wound. Sterling and Vivian's words, their hollow justifications, had left me with a bitter taste. But the flashback faded, pulling me back to the present, to the small inn room, the decoded message still spread out on the table. Clara was watching me, her brow furrowed with concern. "Eleanor, you okay? You went somewhere else for a minute there." I shook my head, trying to clear the lingering fog. "Yeah, just remembering a time when I thought I knew things, when I thought I understood." Julian's offer of hush money felt like a cheap insult now. He thought he could buy my silence, buy my complicity in their lies. But the message, and the memories it stirred, had changed everything. It wasn't just about being given away. It was about being hidden, about being erased. "We need to talk to Thorne," I said, my voice firm. "He's the lawyer. He knows all the dirt. He's got to know why they did it, why they put me with Beatrice and kept me so far away." Clara nodded, her usual skepticism replaced by a grim determination. "He's at his office in Manhattan, right? Thorne and Associates. That place looks like it eats people for breakfast." The drive into the city was tense. The skyscrapers loomed, a stark contrast to the quiet streets of Willow Creek. Thorne and Associates was exactly as Clara described. All sharp angles and cold glass, a monument to power and secrets. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive paper and something else. Something like fear. Marcus Thorne sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his face unreadable. He was younger than Sterling and Vivian, but he carried the same air of controlled authority. He'd clearly been expecting us. "Miss Vance Jenkins," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "I assume you have questions." "You're damn right we have questions," I said, stepping closer to the desk. "You know why I was placed with Beatrice. You know why Sterling and Vivian kept me hidden away for 60 years. Julian offered me money to walk away. I'm not walking away. I want the truth." Thorne's eyes flickered, a micro-expression of surprise, quickly masked. He steepled his fingers, his gaze steady. "Mr. Julian's offer was misguided. He's concerned about family legacy." "Legacy?" Clara scoffed. "Sounds more like a cover-up to me. The Blackwood family has a complex history," Thorne began, choosing his words with extreme care. "Sterling and Vivian, they were young. And Sterling's father, his grandfather before him, they were involved in certain, less than savory dealings. Financial manipulations, offshore accounts, things that could bring down the entire empire if they came to light." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Your birth parents were pressured, severely pressured, to ensure their own safety and to protect the family name. Certain arrangements had to be made. Arrangements that involved severing ties. Completely." My breath hitched. "So, they gave me a way to keep their dirty laundry from being aired?" "It was more than that," Thorne continued, his voice dropping lower. "There was a specific threat. A rival family, deeply entrenched in less than legal enterprises. They saw Sterling's potential, his ambition, and they wanted to control it. They wanted leverage. And they knew about you, Eleanor. They knew you were Sterling's child, born out of wedlock at the time. The threat was dire. Placing you with Beatrice, a woman with no ties to the Blackwoods, in a town far removed from Greenwich, was the only way they believed they could guarantee your safety. It was a sacrifice. A terrible one, but deemed necessary to protect the entire Blackwood lineage. He slid a thick, official-looking document across the desk. This is a trust agreement, established when you were placed. It details the provisions made for your care, and for Beatrice's. It's all here. The truth, Eleanor. The ugly, complicated truth. I stared at the legal document, the cold, hard facts laid out in black and white. It wasn't just a simple adoption. It was a desperate act of protection, a calculated move in a dangerous game I never knew existed. The weight of it settled on me, heavier than I could have imagined. The trust agreement. It felt heavy in my hands like a brick. Thorne had laid out the whole ugly truth, the whole sordid mess of my birth parents trying to protect their empire. He called it a sacrifice. I called it a lifetime of being erased. Back in Willow Creek, sitting at my kitchen table, the document spread out, the smell of Beatrice's famous apple pie still lingering in the air. I knew I couldn't just let it go. I couldn't let Sterling and Vivian win. Julian thought he could buy me off, make me disappear again. Thorne thought he could just hand me a piece of paper and call it closure. They were all wrong. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the lies, the decades of deception that had shaped not just my life but countless others. I was sure of it. My mind flashed back to a conversation with Clara a few days ago, before Thorne's office. We were at the Gilded Cage, trying to have a normal lunch, but the air was thick with the Blackwood stench. Julian had been there too, all smiles and veiled threats. He'd offered me that ridiculous sum, enough to live like a queen, he'd said. But what good is a kingdom if you're a prisoner in it? He thinks he can just buy silence, Eleanor, Clara had said, stirring her coffee like it held the secrets of the universe. Like we're all for sale. That's when the idea hit me, a spark in the darkness. If they thought they could control the narrative, if they thought they could bury the truth in legal jargon and hushed tones, they underestimated me. They underestimated the woman who had spent her life surrounded by stories, by the power of words. I wasn't going to be a footnote in their grand Blackwood saga. I was going to write my own ending. The next few days were a blur of frantic activity. I contacted a journalist I'd met years ago through the library, a sharp woman named Sarah who had a reputation for digging deep. I didn't have to do much convincing. The Blackwood name alone was enough to get her attention. I gave her Thorne's trust agreement, the decoded message, everything. I didn't hold back. I told her about Julian's offer, about Sterling's weary resignation, about Vivian's icy facade. I told her about Beatrice, the woman who truly raised me, who deserved to know the truth too. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning. Hit like a bomb. Front page of the business section, then it spread like wildfire. Blackwood Empire built on lies. Secret adoption exposed. The headline screamed. It talked about Sterling's shady past, the rival families, the threats, the calculated abandonment of his own daughter. It detailed the financial manipulations Thorne had alluded to, the offshore accounts, the whole rotten core of the Blackwood legacy. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The stock market for Blackwood Industries took a nosedive. Investors panicked. Board members called for emergency meetings. Julian was reportedly furious. His face a mask of rage in the few paparazzi shots that surfaced. Sterling and Vivian went completely silent, holed up in Blackwood Manor, their fortress now under siege. I watched it all unfold from my small living room in Willow Creek, Clara by my side, a mixture of fear and exhilaration coursing through me. It was visceral, this feeling of finally being heard, of finally shedding the weight of their secrets. They had tried to bury me, to erase me, but instead they had unearthed their own downfall. The quiet librarian from Ohio had just blown up the world of the ultra-rich, and the sound of it was deafening. This was no longer just about my past. It was about their present and their future, which now looked incredibly bleak. The financial world was reeling, and the Blackwood name, once a symbol of power, was now synonymous with scandal. Julian's fury was a palpable thing. It wasn't the explosive rage of Sterling, or the icy control of Vivian. His was a venomous hiss, a serpent striking from the shadows. The article had hit the Blackwood name like a wrecking ball, and he was not about to go down without a fight. He'd always seen himself as the heir apparent, the one destined to inherit the empire and its carefully constructed facade. This from Ohio, this Eleanor Vance, was threatening to tear it all down. He started subtly, of course. The Blackwood playbook. First whisper campaigns. Anonymous tips to gossip columns, painting me as a gold digger, a disgruntled relative looking for a payday. They spun tales of my supposed greed, twisting my quest for truth into a desperate grab for Blackwood cash. Clara, bless her nosy heart, was a goldmine of this intel. She'd hear things at the beauty salon, at the grocery store, whispers about Eleanor Vance, the woman who tried to extort the Blackwoods. It stung, sure, but it also fueled the fire in my belly. They thought they could smear me with mud. I'd been digging in the dirt of their secrets for months. Then came the legal threats. Julian, with his slick lawyer, Thorne, breathing down his neck, sent cease and desist letters. They claimed I had defamed the Blackwood family, that my statements were baseless accusations designed to harm their reputation. Thorne's words, delivered through a sterile legal document, were sharp and cold like shards of ice. He cited the trust agreement, reminding me of the generous provisions made for my care and Beatrice's. He implied I was ungrateful, a spoiled child throwing a tantrum. The nerve. Julian himself made a public appearance, a carefully orchestrated press conference held at some fancy New York hotel. He looked every bit the grieving son, his eyes red-rimmed, his voice thick with feigned emotion. He spoke of family privacy, of the pain of public scrutiny. He alluded to unsubstantiated claims and personal vendettas, carefully sidestepping any mention of the actual facts. He painted me as an unstable individual, a stranger trying to disrupt a grieving family's peace. It was a masterclass in manipulation, a performance designed to make me look like the villain. I watched it on Clara's small television, the grainy image of Julian's face filling the screen. He was good, I'll give him that. He had the charm, the polish, the practiced sincerity that could fool anyone. But I'd seen behind the curtain. I knew the rot that lay beneath the gilded surface. He's trying to twist this, Eleanor, Clara said, her voice tight with anger, making it sound like the bad guy. I nodded, my gaze fixed on the screen. He thinks he can control the narrative, Clara. Just like his parents. They've been doing it for years. The pressure was mounting. The whispers were getting louder, the legal threats more insistent. I could feel the weight of their retaliation, a heavy cloak of disapproval settling over me. It was a different kind of hell than the one I'd endured before, more insidious, more public. They weren't trying to hide me anymore. They were trying to discredit me, to erase the truth I had so painstakingly unearthed. But they underestimated me. They always had. They thought a librarian would be easily silenced, easily dismissed. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. This wasn't just about my story anymore. It was about the power of truth against a dynasty built on lies. Julian's attack was just another sign that I was hitting them where it hurt. The legal threats and Julian's slick press conference were like a storm cloud I knew would break. Thorne's sterile letters, filled with legalese and veiled accusations, felt like icy needles. He painted me as ungrateful, a spoiled kid throwing a fit. The nerve of that man, talking about generous provisions when my whole life had been built on a lie. Julian, with his red-rimmed eyes and practiced sorrow, had tried to spin me into the villain, the unstable stranger disrupting their precious family peace. I watched it all on Clara's TV, that grainy image of him trying to control the narrative, just like his parents always had. But something shifted in me after that. Seeing their desperation, their thinly veiled panic, it didn't scare me anymore. It solidified something. It showed me I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for the truth, for all the other hidden stories out there. Beatrice, my mom, she deserved to know the whole story, not just the sanitized version the Blackwoods wanted to peddle. Clara, my rock, she was right there with me, her eyes blazing with indignation every time Julian opened his mouth. They're scared, Eleanor, Clara said, stirring her tea, her hand trembling slightly. They know you've got them cornered. And she was right. The more they pushed, the more I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. It was like shedding a heavy coat I didn't even know I was wearing. This wasn't about the money, or the fancy life they offered. It was about reclaiming my own story, my own identity. For 60 years I'd been Eleanor Vance, the quiet librarian from Willow Creek. Now I was Eleanor Vance, the woman who had uncovered the Blackwood Empire's rotten core. We spent a lot of time at my place in Willow Creek, the Vance family home, surrounded by the familiar comfort of Beatrice's quilts and the scent of old books. Beatrice, bless her heart, was finally coming to terms with it all. The initial shock had been immense, but seeing my resolve and the sheer audacity of the Blackwoods, she'd found a quiet strength of her own. She'd sit with me, her hand on mine, her eyes filled with a love that had never wavered, even when she didn't know the full truth. "You're doing the right thing, honey," she'd say, her voice raspy but firm. "The truth always comes out one way or another." Clara was a constant presence, her energy infectious. She'd bring over her famous apple pie, her own brand of comfort food, and we'd strategize. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about setting the record straight. It was about ensuring that Sterling and Vivian and Julian couldn't just sweep their past under the rug and pretend it never happened. The coded message from the journal, that faded, leather-bound journal I'd found hidden away, felt like a key. It was proof, a direct link to the choices they'd made. I started writing again, not just for myself but for others. I kept a new journal, filling its pages with my thoughts, my feelings, the raw emotions of this whirlwind. It was therapeutic, a way to process the betrayal and the eventual acceptance. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into Thorne's office months ago. That woman was timid, uncertain, lost. This Eleanor, she was forged in the fires of revelation. She understood the weight of secrets, the cost of lies, and the incredible power of finally speaking your truth. The Blackwood name might still hold sway in some circles, but it was no longer a symbol of untouchable power to me. It was a cautionary tale. And I, Eleanor Vance, was the one who had finally dared to tell it. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a newfound sense of purpose. I had a story to tell, and I was going to tell it with all the strength and conviction I possessed. My life, once a quiet stream, had become a raging river, and I was ready to navigate its powerful currents. The air in Blackwood Manor felt thick, heavy with unspoken history and the scent of old money. It had been weeks since Julian's little press conference, weeks of mounting pressure, but I'd held my ground. Clara and Beatrice were my anchors, their belief in me a shield against the whispers and veiled threats. Now it was time to bring it all to a head right here in their gilded cage. I'd called this meeting. Sterling, Vivian, Julian, and Marcus were all present, gathered in the cavernous drawing room. The silence was deafening, broken only by the ticking of an ornate grandfather clock, each chime a hammer blow against my resolve. Sterling sat stiffly in his armchair, his face a mask of weary resignation. Vivian, ever the picture of composure, sat beside him, her eyes sharp and calculating, betraying none of the turmoil I knew she must be feeling. Julian, his jaw tight, glared at me from across the room, his usual arrogance replaced by a simmering hostility. Marcus stood near the fireplace, his expression unreadable, the lawyer's detachment a familiar shield. "You wanted to see us, Eleanor?" Sterling's voice was a low rumble, devoid of the warmth I'd glimpsed during our first encounter. I took a deep breath, the scent of polished wood and old secrets filling my lungs. "I did. I'm tired of the games. Tired of the lies. It's time everyone knew the truth." I held up the faded, leather-bound journal. "This is proof. Proof of what you did, Sterling. Proof of why I ended up in Willow Creek." Vivian's composure finally cracked. A sharp intake of breath, a flicker of panic in her eyes. "That's a private family matter, Eleanor. Something that should remain buried." "Buried?" I scoffed, the sound echoing in the vast room. "You buried me, Vivian. You buried my life, my identity, for 60 years. You think I'm going to let you keep that buried? I opened the journal, its pages brittle with age. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about Beatrice, who raised me with nothing but love, never knowing the truth. It's about the legacy you've built on a foundation of deceit. Julian pushed himself up from his seat, his voice dripping with contempt. You think you can just waltz in here and tear down everything we've worked for? You're a nobody, Eleanor. A mistake. A mistake you've spent months trying to silence, I retorted, my voice gaining strength. Whispers, legal threats, Julian's little smear campaign. You're all so afraid of the truth, aren't you? I turned to Sterling. You chose your empire over your child. You let Vivian convince you it was for the best. But was it? Was it worth it, Sterling? 60 years of regret, of knowing you abandoned your own flesh and blood. Sterling's shoulders slumped. He looked away, his gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond the opulent room. It was complicated, Eleanor. Complicated. Vivian's voice was a hiss. It was the only way. You were a burden, a complication we couldn't afford. Sterling was on the cusp of everything. We made a difficult choice. The coldness of her words, the utter lack of remorse, hit me like a physical blow. I'd expected some flicker of maternal regret, some hint of the mother I'd never known. But there was nothing, just calculated self-preservation. A choice that cost me everything, I said, my voice trembling, not with fear, but with a righteous anger that had been simmering for decades. You didn't just give me away, you erased me. You tried to pretend I never existed. I looked at Marcus. And you, Marcus, you've been complicit in all of it, haven't you? Covering up their tracks, sending those nasty letters, trying to intimidate me into silence. Marcus finally spoke, his voice low and steady. My duty is to my clients, Eleanor. To protect their interests. Even when those interests are built on a lie. Challenged. Even when it means destroying someone else's life. I took a step forward, my gaze sweeping over each of them. Well, the game is over. The truth is out. The world will know who the Blackwoods really are. Not the titans of industry, but the people who threw away their own daughter to protect their perfect image. Sterling finally met my eyes, and in them, I saw a flicker of something that might have been shame. Vivian stood rigid, her face a mask of stone, but her tightly clenched fists betrayed her. Julian looked ready to explode, his face a mask of pure fury. This isn't over, Julian spat, his voice raw. No, I agreed, a grim satisfaction settling over me. It's just beginning. The unraveling had begun, and I, Eleanor Vance, was the one holding the thread. The legacy they had so carefully crafted was about to crumble, and I would be there to witness it. The dust had settled, not just in the grand, echoing halls of Blackwood Manor, but within me. The storm Julian had tried to whip up, the icy needles of Thorne's letters, the desperate attempts to control the narrative, it all felt like a distant memory now. The air in Greenwich had been thick with unspoken history, with a scent of old money and even older secrets. But here, back in Willow Creek, the air smelled of damp earth after a spring rain and the comforting familiarity of Beatrice's quilts. It had been a few weeks since that final, explosive confrontation at the manor. Weeks of silence from the Blackwoods, a silence that spoke volumes. Julian's fury had been palpable, Vivian's stone face had finally shown cracks, and even Sterling had looked broken. They were trapped, cornered by the truth I'd finally dragged into the light. The faded, leather-bound journal, once a whisper of the past, had become a roar, its pages filled with the evidence of their choices. I sat on the porch swing of the Vance family home, the same swing I'd sat on 1,000 times before, a lifetime ago it seemed. The chipped paint felt real, solid, a stark contrast to the polished veneer of the Blackwood Empire. Beatrice sat beside me, her hand resting on mine, her presence a steady anchor. She didn't need grand pronouncements or dramatic revelations anymore. She'd seen the core of it, the brutal truth of how her daughter had been treated, and her quiet strength had only grown. They're quiet, Beatrice observed, her voice soft like the rustle of leaves. They have nothing left to say, I replied, a sense of calm washing over me. It wasn't the giddy joy of victory, but a deep, settled peace. The fight had been brutal, soul-shattering even, but it had stripped away the layers of doubt and fear I hadn't even known I was carrying. I was no longer Eleanor Vance, the quiet librarian from Willow Creek, defined by a life I thought was mine. I was Eleanor Vance, the woman who had faced down her own history, her own betrayers, and emerged whole. Clara arrived later, her car pulling up the gravel driveway with its usual cheerful rumble. She brought a warm apple pie, its scent filling the small house, a familiar comfort. We didn't need to talk about the Blackwoods anymore. The legal battles had been settled, the public fallout had played out, and the Blackwood name, once so powerful, was now tarnished, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones. You did good, Elle, Clara said, handing me a slice of pie. Real good. I took a bite, the sweet tartness a welcome sensation. It wasn't about winning, Clara. Not really. It was about finally knowing. Knowing that Beatrice had raised me with unwavering love, even in ignorance. Knowing that Sterling had carried regret, however buried. Knowing that Vivian's carefully constructed world had been built on a lie that could no longer stand. The antique silver locket I wore around my neck, a gift from Beatrice years ago, felt different now. It wasn't just a keepsake. It was a symbol of the love that had always been real, the love that had sustained me. The Blackwood fortune, the manor, the power. It all seemed so hollow, so insignificant compared to the simple, honest love I'd known. My new journal, the one I'd started after leaving Thorne's office, lay open on the kitchen table. Its pages were filled not with anger or bitterness, but with reflections, with gratitude. I'd written about the strength I'd found, the resilience I didn't know I possessed. I'd written about Beatrice, about Clara, about the quiet dignity of Willow Creek. The visceral drama of the past few months had forged something new in me, something stronger than any inheritance or any name. Looking out at the familiar landscape, at the trees that had stood sentinel over my life, I felt a profound sense of peace. The hell I'd navigated had led me here, to this quiet understanding. I was no longer a victim of circumstance, but a survivor. The Blackwood legacy, the one they had tried so desperately to protect, was theirs to bear. Mine was a legacy of truth, of love, and of a self I had finally truly found. The librarian from Willow Creek had faced her demons and walked away, not with a fortune, but with something far more valuable, herself. And that was more than enough. That's it. If you liked this video, share it with your friends and leave your like, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss more videos like this. Leave your comments saying what you thought of the video and what you would like to see in the next videos. Remembering that we have other videos in this style that you will like to watch, just enter our channel that I guarantee you will like. Until the next video.